Grammy award-winning singer Selena, at just 23 years old, collapsed on a motel lobby floor, pressing her hand to her chest as staff rushed to lock the doors behind her. She sustained a single gunshot wound that can drain a life in just minutes, and paramedics raced against the clock to get her to the operating room. Many of you are familiar with today's story, but I can promise you, you haven't heard it like this before. Today, we're going to address a highly debated question. Did Selena really die because blood transfusions were refused? Many have rumored that her wounds were survivable and that she died for her faith, but today we're going to dive into this from a nurse's perspective to answer that very polarizing question. Welcome to the True Crime Nurse, everybody. My name is Kat, and I'm a registered nurse who loves all things nursing and true crime. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell before you go. Before we answer the pressing question of today's case, we need to cover some background information first just to catch everybody up to speed. Selena Quintanilla was born on April 16, 1971 in Lake Jackson, Texas, to her parents Abraham and Marcella. Two things that were really important to this family were music and faith. Selena grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, and her parents are still members of that faith today. Being in a musical family, she began performing at a very young age in her father's band alongside her older brother AB and sister Suzette. Selena's talent was obvious to her family from early on, and they knew that she was destined to be a star. By her teen years, she was recording music in Spanish and winning over crowds all across Texas and Mexico. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Selena's popularity soared in the Tejano music scene, which is a genre that blends Spanish music with upbeat Texas-based rhythms. She achieved several #1 hits on the Latin music charts and earned the nickname Queen of Tejano Music herself. In 1994, Selena won a Grammy Award for Best Mexican American Album for her album called Selena Live, becoming the first ever Tejano artist to win in that category. This was an incredible achievement. She was a superstar that was known for her rich voice, dance moves, and fashion-forward stage outfits, many of which she designed, and I actually didn't know that she did this, so I thought that was pretty impressive. In addition to music, Selena pursued her passion for fashion by opening 2 boutique clothing stores called Selena ETC in Texas. By early 1995, at just 23 years old, Selena was not only a music icon in the Latino community, but she was also preparing to cross into the mainstream US market. She had begun recording her songs in English for an album called Dreaming of You, which would make her one of the first ever artists to have a major crossover success into pop music. Despite her monumental fame and success, those who knew Selena personally said that she was really down to earth, family-oriented, and kind-hearted. She married her guitarist, Chris Perez, in 1992 against her father's initial wishes, but the family eventually grew to accept and love Chris for her. Selena was at a point in her life where her personal happiness and professional dreams were all coming together. Also in Selena's close circle was a woman named Yolanda Saldivar, who on paper seemed like Selena's supporter and friend. This friend was a wolf in sheep's clothing, though. Yolanda Saldivar first came into Selena's life as a fan. Saldivar was about 11 years older than Selena and had worked professionally as a nurse. In the late 1980s, she became a huge fan of Selena's music, went to her concerts, and repeatedly contacted Selena's father, who managed Selena's career, with an idea. She wanted to start an official Selena fan club in San Antonio, Texas. By 1991, the family agreed because they saw this as a way to help continue grow Selena's popularity. Yolanda Saldivar was named the president of the Selena fan club. She was responsible for recruiting members and organizing fan events, and she collected membership fees in exchange for promised perks like fan club t-shirts, exclusive news, and meet and greet opportunities. Yolanda was hardworking and dependable at first. She grew close to the Quintanilla family, especially with Selena. Selena was really impressed and began to treat her as more than just a fan club president. Yolanda became like a family friend and eventually was given much bigger responsibilities. By 1994, as Selena's fashion business expanded, Yolanda was hired to manage Selena's boutique shops in Corpus Christi and in San Antonio. Selena seemed to really value Yolanda's loyalty and would defend her if anyone said that they didn't trust her. Yolanda became a constant presence, and she even had the key to Selena's house, traveled with her, handled her scheduling in some cases, and was usually by Selena's side at events. To Selena, Yolanda was a trusted confidant who had earned a place in both her business and personal life. I could imagine that it would be hard to trust anyone with that level of success, so to know that Selena went so far as to defending Yolanda, knowing what is to come, is just sickening. However, behind the scenes, not everything was as smooth as it seemed. People who worked with Selena began to notice concerning things about Yolanda's behavior. Employees at Selena's boutiques reported that Yolanda was controlling and vindictive. When Selena was present, Yolanda was very sweet, but as soon as Selena left, Yolanda's demeanor towards other employees and even fans would turn hostile. She ran the boutiques with an iron fist and clashed with a lot of other staff. Over time, many experienced employees either quit or were fired by Yolanda, and the staff at the boutiques dwindled down quickly under Yolanda's management because she reportedly fired people even if she just didn't like them. Staff felt that Yolanda's possessiveness was isolating Selena from others, and it was alarming. By late 1994, even more red flags began to emerge regarding Yolanda's management. The boutique was missing money and had unpaid bills. Selena's fashion designer, Martin Gomez, complained that Yolanda wasn't paying invoices and even alleged that Yolanda was mishandling important business. Around that same time, members of the fan club began to complain that they weren't receiving the merchandise after sending in their membership fees, and angry letters and calls from these fans who felt very cheated were starting to make their way to Selena's family. These issues pointed to serious mismanagement or fraud on Yolanda's part. Selena, who always tried to see the best in people, initially couldn't believe that her friend would do something like this. When employees told her that Yolanda was mistreating staff or not sending out fan club orders, Selena hesitated to accept it. Yolanda had been so loyal that in Selena's eyes, it was hard to reconcile these accusations. The signs of trouble were too big to ignore, and Selena's father, Abraham, decided to step in. In March of 1995, he conducted a review of all the fan club finances and boutique accounts. What he discovered was alarming. Over $60,000 in funds appeared to be missing or misappropriated. There were checks that were written from the fan club account that looked suspicious and had been signed by Yolanda in what appeared to be her handwriting, but using other people's names. Money from boutique sales were unaccounted for too. Abraham realized that Yolanda had opened some bank accounts related to Selena's business under Yolanda's sister's name instead of her own. On March 9, 1995, Abraham called for a meeting at Selena's recording studio, Q Productions. He gathered Selena and her sister Suzette and then called in Yolanda Saldivar for a face-to-face confrontation. Abraham confronted Yolanda with all of the financial documents and fan letters, and he demanded an explanation for the missing money and the fan club complaints. Selena was hurt and confused and still looked to her friend for answers. Yolanda's response was to avoid everything. According to Abraham, Yolanda sat there silently or danced around the subject with weak excuses. When asked why fans hadn't received their merchandise, Yolanda claimed that those fans were trying to get freebies and were lying, but this answer didn't explain where their money was going. When confronted about the checks and the bank account under her sister's name, Yolanda had nothing to say about it. She said that the bank wouldn't allow her to open up an account in her own name, which just made no sense, and she couldn't explain why large amounts of money were also missing. She was extremely emotional, crying and pleading, and at other times she was icy and calm, which Abraham found chilling. As this meeting continued, Abraham grew furious. Finally, he hit a breaking point when he told Yolanda that he had the proof of her theft. There was no denying it anymore. Selena was in tears, feeling betrayed and concerned about someone she trusted. Before Yolanda left, Abraham told her that she was fired from her positions and that she was banned from any further contact with Selena. His last words to Yolanda were, "Stay away from his daughter." Suzette, who was just as upset, backed her father up too. They made it clear that this needed to be the end of Yolanda's involvement in Selena's life, and I wish that I could say that's where today's story ended. Yolanda left that meeting with no defense for her actions. However, Selena's feelings were far more complicated than that. Despite her anger and hurt, Selena had a soft heart, and she had considered Yolanda a friend or like a big sister. Selena was also concerned because Yolanda still had certain records and documents like bank statements, tax papers, and the fan club list that Selena needed to collect for her business. Also, Selena was preparing to open up a boutique in Mexico, and Yolanda had made arrangements for all of that. It seemed smarter to part ways with Yolanda gradually and amicably once everything had been settled, rather than in this explosive confrontation. After the meeting, Selena confided to her sister that she did plan to terminate Yolanda within a few days, but she wanted to get her business papers back first. Abraham disagreed and was adamant that Yolanda should have nothing more to do with Selena. In fact, the very next day on March 10th, Abraham discovered Yolanda still hanging out around the Q Production studio and taking phone calls. He was so angry that he personally chased Yolanda off of the property, making it clear that she was no longer welcome there. That same day, he told other employees and security to keep Yolanda away, and if she tried to come back, to let him know. Selena, on the other hand, was very conflicted. She felt responsible in a way for what had happened, and she worried for Yolanda's well being now that their friendship had imploded. Despite feeling this way, Selena started taking steps to remove Yolanda from the business bank accounts on March 10th, and she changed some of the administrative passwords. But she didn't fully cut off communication with Yolanda. The two were still in contact in the days after March 9th because Selena was still asking for the documents. Yolanda promised that she would hand everything over, but she repeatedly told Selena that she had them but needed more time to just get them organized and get them over to her. Only one day after being fired, on March 11th, Yolanda went to a gun shop in San Antonio called A Place to Shoot, which was also a firing range. There, Yolanda purchased a revolver. She specifically bought hollow point bullets for the revolver, and hollow point bullets are designed to expand on impact, causing larger wound channels, meaning they are more lethal. And she's a nurse, so she knows this. This choice of ammunition suggests that Yolanda wanted to be sure that if the gun were used, it would inflict maximum damage. Yolanda gave a story to justify her purchase when she claimed that she was a nurse, which was true, and that she needed a gun for protection because a patient's family had been threatening her. At the time, background checks and waiting periods for handgun purchases in Texas were minimal, if existent at all, so Yolanda walked out that same day with a brand new gun and hollow point bullets. On March 13th, 1995, Yolanda visited an attorney in San Antonio to prepare a formal resignation letter. This was really strange because she had already been fired days earlier. Abraham later speculated that Yolanda was creating an alibi to form a paper trail that would make it look like she resigned voluntarily and had no ill will towards Selena. Despite everything, Selena and Yolanda continued to communicate mainly about business documents. On March 15th, just a few days after that blow-up fight, Selena and Yolanda met in person for the first time since that confrontation. Yolanda had called Selena and insisted on meeting to hand over some of those missing documents. Yolanda requested not to meet at Selena's home or business, but instead at a parking lot alongside a highway about 25 miles outside of Corpus Christi. Selena agreed and drove out to meet Yolanda. Selena's husband Chris came with her but stayed inside the car to let Selena handle the exchange. Selena confronted Yolanda again about the records. Yolanda was emotional and probably afraid of what Selena might do, legally or personally, in response to that betrayal. Yolanda pulled out the revolver that she had bought. Selena was shocked and upset and told Yolanda to get rid of the gun, telling her she didn't need that type of protection. Selena even said that she would protect Yolanda from any threats because Selena thought that Yolanda had gotten that gun out of fear of Abraham's anger, and Selena begged Yolanda to turn the weapon into the police or dispose of it safely. During this tense argument, Yolanda said that she never meant to hurt Selena and that she felt like her world was ending. Selena was compassionate and she assured Yolanda that violence was not the answer and that things could still be worked out. It's shocking to know that Selena knew that Yolanda had the gun, and that was the very weapon that would take her life, and yet she still felt the need to protect Yolanda from it. This really shows us that she had such a huge heart for other people. Surprisingly, Yolanda seemed to back off and backtrack. The very next day, on March 16th, Yolanda actually did return the revolver to that same gun shop in San Antonio. She told the store clerk that her father had gifted her a different gun, so she no longer needed it. She got a refund and she walked away. Selena's schedule at this time was insanely busy because she had recording sessions, public appearances, and she scheduled to travel too. Yolanda, on the other hand, was stewing. She still hadn't handed over the documents, and many believe that she was holding them back intentionally to later trap Selena. Despite everything that had happened, Selena did something that in hindsight was very risky. She allowed Yolanda to come with her on one final trip to Monterrey, Mexico at the end of March. Selena had a concert there on March 26 and also planned to meet with a Mexican music manager and factory regarding her fashion line. Yolanda had been involved with all of the planning for the Mexican boutique, so she invited her along to help. During that Monterrey trip, Yolanda kept a very low profile, but things took another weird turn. On March 29th, while still in Mexico, Yolanda contacted Selena's home and was hysterically crying. She claimed that she'd been attacked and violated during that trip, claiming that someone had assaulted her in Mexico just the day before. This came out of nowhere. Everyone who heard Yolanda's story was skeptical, especially given the timing and Yolanda's recent behavior. One of Selena's friends, named Dr. Ricardo Martinez, who had been helping Selena with the business in Mexico, also received a frantic call from Yolanda. He later said that Yolanda was crying about being attacked, but when he tried to get details from her about what happened, Her story was inconsistent, and she quickly hung up. On March 30th, Selena returned to the United States from Mexico. Yolanda also returned and checked into the Days Inn Motel in Corpus Christi, booking room number 158. That day, Yolanda managed to get in touch with Selena and said that she was back in Texas but in really bad shape from the attack. Yolanda insisted that she needed to speak with Selena privately to give her all of the remaining documents and tell her about what happened in Mexico. Selena was really worried and agreed to meet Yolanda the next morning on March 31st to help her get medical attention if needed and to finally get those missing business papers. Selena's family was suspicious about all of this. Abraham warned Selena repeatedly not to go alone to meet Yolanda, and Selena's husband Chris was also apprehensive. On the night of March 30th, when Selena told Chris that Yolanda was back and wanted to meet her early the next day, Chris begged Selena not to go by herself. His intuition told him that nothing good could come from another private meeting with her, but Selena felt responsible for resolving this situation. She thought that everything had calmed down with Yolanda after the trip and that Yolanda had returned that gun, as far as Selena knew, so she believed that she could handle Yolanda in a one-on-one. What Selena didn't know was that Yolanda had rearmed herself. On March 27th, just a couple of days after returning the gun, Yolanda went back to that gun shop in San Antonio and purchased the very same gun. Selena made plans to see Yolanda in the morning, and she hoped that within a couple of hours, she could take Yolanda to get the medical care that she needed, collect the records, and then finally move on with her life and put all of this mess behind her. Unfortunately, Yolanda had something far more tragic planned. Friday, March 31st, 1995 started early for Selena. Despite having a recording session scheduled later that morning, Selena decided to meet with Yolanda first. At around 7:30 in the morning, Selena drove to the Days Inn in Corpus Christi where Yolanda was staying. Selena actually picked Yolanda up from the motel to take her to Doctors Regional Hospital in Corpus Christi to get her the medical attention she needed. Yolanda was seen in the emergency department around 9 a.m. Almost immediately, hospital staff noted inconsistencies in Yolanda's story and demeanor. Yolanda was visibly upset, but her clinical description of the alleged assault didn't add up. She told the nurse what happened in Mexico a couple days before, but when asked about her symptoms, Yolanda said that she was only bleeding a little bit, and this contradicted what she told Selena earlier when she said that she had been bleeding heavily. Selena became angry because it was hitting her that Yolanda's story might be made up, and she wanted to know why. The hospital staff informed Yolanda and Selena that since this occurred outside of the United States, they needed to involve authorities there or go to a hospital in San Antonio that could handle out-of-the-country incidents like this. Selena and Yolanda left the hospital by around 10 a.m. That drive back to the motel was filled with tension because Selena had just spent the morning dealing with what she now suspected was a lie, and she still hadn't even gotten the financial paperwork that she was promised. Selena confronted Yolanda, and at one point, Selena told Yolanda that she was fed up and that it would be best if they ended all contact after that day. Selena also said that Yolanda's behavior was upsetting her family, especially Abraham, and that they needed distance. At this point, she said that she would drop Yolanda off and part ways once the business was wrapped up. During this time, back at Q Productions, Selena's absence was concerning. She was expected to be at the studio by 10:30, so when Selena hadn't shown up, her father Abraham became very worried and called Selena's husband. Chris realized Selena was still dealing with Yolanda. He paged Selena and then got a call back on his cell phone. Selena answered and she sounded irritated but not panicked. She told Chris that she forgot about the recording session and was taking care of one last piece of business. She said she'd be at the studio soon and not to worry, but that was the last time anyone from Selena's family would speak to her again. Around 11 a.m., Selena and Yolanda arrived back at the Days Inn Motel in room 158. Once inside that room, an argument erupted. Guests in neighboring rooms reported hearing two women arguing loudly, and Selena was furious. Yolanda had strung her along for weeks, and this morning's wild goose chase at the hospital was the final straw. Selena demanded that Yolanda hand over those papers immediately, and she told Yolanda that their friendship and business relationship were over. Selena noticed that she didn't have all the documents. In a moment of pure frustration, Selena reportedly grabbed Yolanda's bag and dumped it onto the bed, searching for those bank statements. It's at this point that Selena saw something alarming mixed in with the papers and personal items. She saw the gun. Selena realized the situation had just escalated from a heated argument to a life-threatening situation, and she was terrified. What exactly was said in the seconds before the shooting is only known from Yolanda's perspective. Yolanda claimed that Selena became enraged and physically aggressive, but there's no evidence that Selena ever attacked Yolanda. What seems more likely is that Selena's discovery of the gun caused her to immediately panic, and she decided she needed to get out of that room immediately. It was at approximately 11:48 in the morning when Yolanda Saldivar drew the revolver and pointed it at Selena. This was someone she considered a friend now aiming a gun at her. Selena's instinct was to flee. She turned and made a dash for the door, and just as Selena was escaping room 158, Yolanda pulled the trigger. A single, deafening gunshot echoed through the motel. The bullet struck Selena in the right upper back near her shoulder blade. The hollow point bullet caused extensive damage internally. We'll be diving into the full extent of her injuries a little later on, but in that instant, Selena's internal bleeding was catastrophic. The subclavian artery is a high-pressure vessel, but with it perforated, blood was now pumping directly out of the artery into Selena's chest cavity, through the exit wound, and outside of her body. This severe of an injury leads to rapid blood loss and is absolutely life-threatening. Selena stumbled forward through the door, wounded but still alive and conscious. She was in shock, both literally and figuratively. She was entering hypovolemic shock from blood loss, and her mind must have been reeling at the betrayal and pain. Yet adrenaline kicked in and gave her a sudden surge of strength. Selena's one goal was to get away from Yolanda and find help. After firing the shot, Yolanda Saldivar didn't rush to Selena's aid or flee in the opposite direction. Instead, she followed Selena out of the door into the walkway, yelling after her. A motel maintenance worker heard what he thought was a loud pop that sounded like a car backfiring, and then moments later saw two women running. Selena was in front, clearly injured and clutching her chest, and Yolanda was behind her with a gun still in her hand. Yolanda yelled at Selena, reportedly calling her names. Selena was bleeding and desperate, running for her life, and Yolanda was chasing after her and yelling at her. I can't wrap my mind around how petrified she must have been in her final moments. Selena was running along the exterior corridor of the motel, headed towards the lobby. The distance between room 158 to the lobby was about 130 yards or 120 meters. Selena managed to run that full distance. She held her right hand tightly against her chest, trying instinctively to stop the bleeding, but blood continued to pour out, soaking her clothes and leaving a continuous trail on the concrete behind her. This trail was measured at nearly 392 feet by investigators. Some witnesses said that Yolanda raised the gun as if she were planning to shoot Selena again in the back, but she didn't pull the trigger a second time. It's possible that the revolver was still loaded with 4 more rounds, but for reasons only Yolanda knows, she didn't fire again. Instead, she eerily watched Selena continue to run. Yolanda turned and walked back towards the motel room when she realized people around her were watching the scene unfold. Multiple guests saw Yolanda calmly return to room 158, gun in hand, and disappear. Selena was running on pure adrenaline at this point. As she turned a corner towards the lobby entrance, she nearly collided with a young man who had been standing outside waiting. Selena was gasping and frightened as she grabbed the young man and cried, saying, "They'll shoot me again, they'll shoot me again." He stood in shock as this bloody, distraught woman latched onto him, and then he saw Yolanda coming down the corridor again with the gun. The man quickly understood what was happening and tried to get Selena to safety as quickly as possible. Moments later, at 11:49 a.m., Selena pushed through the glass doors of the motel lobby. Motel employees were going on about their routine when they looked up to see the singer in horrific condition. Selena was drenched in blood, and one employee later said that it looked like Selena had been dipped in it from the chest down and was desperately shouting, "Help me, I've been shot." The sight of Selena staggering into that lobby stunned everyone. Not only because they recognized who she was, but because of the shock and horror at what was happening. Selena was visibly faint, but she yelled, "Lock the door, she'll shoot me again." Selena was warning them that the shooter was right behind her and armed. The employees rushed to lock the front door of the lobby to prevent Yolanda from getting in. Selena's strength was failing. She grabbed the counter, leaving a red handprint of blood on it, and then collapsed onto the floor. The staff sprang into action. They immediately dialed 911 and told the emergency operator that a woman had been shot at the Days Inn Motel and was bleeding heavily. Staff knelt beside Selena, trying to keep the critically wounded woman conscious, but Selena was fading fast, and she knew that she needed to communicate what happened in case she lost consciousness completely. Mustering up the last of her energy, Selena identified her assailant. She gasped out, Yolanda 158, telling staff both the name of the shooter and the room where it happened. This incredible clarity to provide a name and location helped ensure that there would be no mystery about who was responsible, even if Selena didn't survive. Right after giving Yolanda's name and room number, Selena's condition rapidly declined. The motel's sales director arrived and cradled Selena in his arms. He and another employee tried to apply pressure to her wound using towels or clothing or anything that they could find. Blood was everywhere, and they were covered in it too as they pressed on Selena's upper chest. She was moaning in pain and her eyes were rolling back. The director gently talked to her, saying things like, Selena, stay with us. Selena, the ambulance is coming. Stay awake. But Selena's body was shutting down from the lack of blood and oxygen. Within a minute or two of entering the lobby, Selena lost the ability to speak. She slumped as her consciousness slipped away. Around this time, one of the employees rushed outside for a moment and saw Yolanda near the motel room area. Yolanda apparently approached the lobby door, but it was locked. Witnesses later said that Yolanda made eye contact with them through the glass, then turned and walked back to her pickup truck nearby. They saw her reach into her truck and pull out what looked like a small wrapped towel, which was the gun. Yolanda then got into the driver's seat of her red GMC pickup truck, and the motel staff told the 911 operator that the suspect was attempting to flee. An ambulance arrived at the Days Inn Motel approximately 1 minute and 55 seconds after dispatch. By 11:52 a.m., paramedics from Corpus Christi's EMS were on scene, and they rushed into the lobby where Selena was found on the ground, motionless, with employees huddled all around her doing everything that they could to help. The lead paramedic immediately knew that this was a code red trauma. She was a young female with massive blood loss from a gunshot wound, and he quickly assessed her vital signs. Selena had no carotid pulse that he could feel, and in fact, when he put his fingers to her neck, he later said that he could only detect muscle twitches, which is a sign of severe shock or could be the final cardiac activity. She was not breathing, but her eyes were open and fixed. Clinically, she was on the brink of death, if not already beyond surviving. The paramedics had to act immediately and aggressively. They cut away Selena's clothes from her upper body to expose the wounds. Selena had been wearing a green sweatsuit that morning, and the green fabric was completely soaked through. As they cut it away, blood gushed from the wound area because the clot that had been formed there was disturbed, and her heart, though barely beating, pushed out more blood. One paramedic applied a Vaseline gauze pad directly over the bullet exit wound on Selena's chest. This specialized gauze, which is coated with petroleum jelly, is used to seal open chest wounds to prevent air from being sucked into the chest because that can cause a collapsed lung, and it also helps to slow external bleeding. They pressed firmly, and this did help slow the surface bleeding, but internally, blood was still pooling around the artery. Another paramedic began CPR. He positioned his hands on Selena's sternum and started chest compressions to move what little blood did remain in her system. Each compression would force some blood to move, but without enough volume, it was a losing battle. They also quickly intubated Selena, inserting a breathing tube down her throat to secure her airway and ventilate her lungs. This is all an effort to keep oxygenated blood moving through the body and especially to the brain to try to save her life. Selena's skin was ashen and started to turn blue from the lack of oxygen. The paramedics noted that there was a tremendous amount of blood on the floor and a thick pool that stretched from her neck down to her knees. It was unlike anything they'd ever seen from a single gunshot wound victim. This made it clear that a major vessel had to have been hit. They realized that if there was any chance to save her life, it would absolutely require surgical intervention at the hospital and fast. They attempted to start an IV to administer fluids but struggled. Selena's veins had collapsed due to critically low blood pressure, and after multiple attempts, they finally managed to get a line in one arm, but they had no blood on the ambulance, so only saline solution, which that can't carry oxygen, but it can help increase blood volume. They began squeezing IV fluids into her, but they knew it wasn't going to be enough. All of this happened in just minutes. The paramedics made the call to transport immediately rather than to treat further on scene and stabilize her. They got Selena onto the stretcher, continuing CPR as they moved. One medic literally rode on top of Selena, performing chest compressions as they wheeled her out, since stopping CPR would mean that there'd be no blood going to her brain at all. By 11:56, the ambulance was en route to Corpus Christi Memorial Hospital. Police officers had begun arriving too, with some attending to the suspect outside, meaning Yolanda in her truck, and others escorting the ambulance. During the short ride to the hospital, which was only a couple of miles away, the medics monitored for any sign of a heart rhythm while continuing CPR. At one point, they did detect a very faint, irregular heartbeat on the cardiac monitor, but this gave them a small glimmer of hope that if they could just get her to the ER, the team might be able to revive her. The ambulance crew reported code 1 or critical condition over the radio and reported that the patient was a severe trauma case to alert the hospital so that they could prepare for her arrival. I want to take a moment to pause here to talk about Selena's faith and how it connects to the rumors before we arrived to the hospital and what happened there. Selena was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and Jehovah's Witnesses are a Christian denomination that follow the Bible closely. They believe that they must live by its literal teachings. One of their key beliefs is that life is sacred and that blood represents life itself. Based on biblical passages in Acts and Leviticus, they interpret God's command to abstain from blood to mean that they cannot accept blood transfusions, even in medical emergencies. They view receiving blood as a violation of God's law and instead use alternative medical treatments that don't involve blood. Jehovah's Witnesses typically use a range of non-medical alternatives that allow doctors to treat illnesses or perform surgery while still respecting and maintaining their beliefs. IV fluid solutions like saline, LR, or lactated ringers or dextran replace blood volume without using blood products themselves because these will help expand the volume that's already there to maintain blood pressure. During surgery, a patient's own blood can be collected, cleaned, and returned to their body, but only if it's done in a continuous circuit so that the blood's never stored outside of the body. Another option is erythropoietin, and that's a hormone that stimulates the body to produce more red blood cells, which can be used before surgery or after if there's some blood loss. Iron, vitamin B12, and folic acid supplements will also help the body to naturally build more red blood cells. In emergent situations, hemostatic agents, which are medications and topical sealants to help control bleeding, can also be used, but this is not always ideal in a trauma situation like Selena's. Many hospitals now have programs specifically designed to take care of Jehovah's Witness patients safely and respectfully, and this is very important. Culture and faith need to be upheld and respected no matter what the environment is. I have cared for patients of this faith, and I even had a patient that was in the hospital for months because maintaining their religious beliefs was important to them regardless of their illness and needing blood. Patients have that choice, and the medical staff will always support and respect it. I want to add that Selena reportedly wasn't as devout in her faith during her adulthood, but the foundation was there, and many believe that Selena died of a survivable injury because she refused the blood transfusions. Now that you have some context and background on her faith, we're going to continue on with what happened once she arrived at the hospital. The ambulance arrived at the emergency bay around noon, and they already had a team waiting for her. When the stretcher was rushed in, doctors and nurses saw a young woman completely unresponsive with no measurable vital signs. The initial assessment didn't look good because Selena had no pulse, no spontaneous breathing, and her pupils were fixed and dilated. These are all clinical signs of loss of life. Despite these signs, the trauma team sprang into action. Selena was young and otherwise healthy, and sometimes miracles can happen that bring a patient like her back, especially with quick intervention. They moved her into a trauma room and continued what the paramedics had already started. An emergency thoracotomy was performed almost immediately at the bedside. The ER physician made an incision into Selena's chest to directly access her heart and major blood vessels. Upon opening her chest cavity, blood came pouring out, confirming a massive internal hemorrhage. The team suctioned liters of blood from her chest to quickly clear the view. They located the source of the bleed. The right subclavian artery and veins in that area were badly damaged, and the subclavian artery was completely severed by the bullet. The doctors clamped the artery on both ends to stop any further bleeding. Selena's heart stopped beating. An ER surgeon reached in and began open cardiac massage using his hands to rhythmically squeeze Selena's heart in an attempt to manually pump the blood. Meanwhile, other team members were rapidly infusing units of blood through the IV lines. In total, they transfused at least 6 units of blood, or about 6 pints, which is around 3 liters. They also injected powerful drugs like epinephrine directly into the heart muscle and bloodstream to try to stimulate any cardiac activity that they could to get her heart beating on its own again. For a brief moment, Selena's heart gave a few beats on its own. The team managed to get an erratic heartbeat, and it wasn't strong, but some electrical activity indicated that the heart wasn't completely giving out yet. She fought so hard for her life. Periodically throughout the code, the team will check pulses and the heart rhythm to determine if they should continue on. This was enough to justify continuing resuscitation efforts. They urgently moved her to the operating room to try to repair the injuries and stop the bleed. Around this time, a cardiovascular surgeon named Dr. Luis Elkins arrived. He was a leading cardiac surgeon who had been called in from nearby. When Dr. Elkins got to Selena's side, what he saw was daunting. The trauma team had already opened Selena's chest to perform a clamshell thoracotomy to expose both sides of her chest. He assessed that the entire right side of her chest and side was extremely contused and shredded. The hollow point bullet had ravaged her internal tissues. The right lung had a laceration or cut, the subclavian artery was literally in pieces, and even the muscle and connective tissue in that area were torn apart. Despite all of this, the doctor was still attempting to massage the heart to keep the heart beating. Dr. Elkins took over the resuscitation as most experts do upon arrival. He had the team widen the chest opening for better access to evaluate for any possible surgical fix. They saw that the subclavian artery was clamped, but repairing this would normally require time and stable circulation, and these were things that they didn't have. They continued pumping in blood, but as Elkins later described, as fast as they were transfusing, blood was pouring out of the huge wound internally. Essentially, they were filling a bucket with a giant hole in it. The medical team also continued using the ventilator that the paramedics had placed because it was pumping oxygen into Selena's lungs. Even though one lung was severely damaged, oxygenation was attempted through the other lung and any functional lung tissue. The doctors administered drugs like atropine and calcium in addition to epinephrine to try to get her heart back into a stable rhythm. However, despite these heroic measures, Selena's body wasn't responding. Dr. Elkins carefully assessed the situation after about 40 to 50 minutes of continuous CPR. He determined that Selena's brain had no activity because her pupils were unresponsive to light, which is a sign that no blood was reaching the brainstem. There was no heartbeat. The blood they were infusing was pooling in her chest and draining out, and her circulatory system was completely broken. Practically all of her blood had emptied either into her thoracic cavity or out onto the table. At approximately 1:05 p.m., Dr. Elkins made the painful call that Selena Quintanilla Perez was deceased. In reality, Selena had been beyond saving from the moment that bullet perforated her artery at the motel. Dr. Elkins later said that she was dead when she arrived. The interventions had been valiant, but they couldn't save her life. Hospital staff cleaned Selena's body and covered her up. Medical staff were in shock and in tears because it's not every day that someone that's so young and well-known comes in fatally wounded. Many of the doctors and nurses knew of Selena's stardom. She was so loved in this community, so it was a deeply personal loss to the team. I couldn't imagine experiencing something like that. Selena's husband, Chris, and other family members rushed to the hospital to be by Selena's side. They were brought into a private room, and when the doctor came to deliver the news, their worst fears were confirmed. The wails of grief from her family echoed throughout the halls. Outside of the hospital, fans and media had already began to gather after hearing about the shooting that happened at the hotel. Heavy sadness and disbelief fell over everyone as the news spread that Selena had been murdered. Before we continue on, in case you didn't catch the answer to the rumor, Selena did receive blood transfusions despite her faith. In fact, she received several of them, but her injuries were too severe to make the difference. So, no, Selena didn't die because she refused blood transfusions, and neither did her husband or her father. I don't want to get into the ethics surrounding that too much, but one thing I will say is that in the medical field, our job is to do everything that we can until we have either a legal or religious reason not to. Meaning, if someone's heart stops beating at the hospital and maybe we're not aware that they have a DNR, then staff would do CPR. Once they're made aware of the person's wishes, then they will follow them. I can't say with certainty if the hospital staff knew that Selena was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, but I can tell you that in a level 1 trauma scenario, they have to do everything that they can to save her life. Abraham, Selena's father, was deeply hurt by the accusations that she died because of refusing blood transfusions, and was even more hurt when he found out that many speculated that the refusal came from family. He made it clear that any of Selena's loved ones would have supported medical staff in saving her life. Now that we have that answer, we're going to talk about the autopsy. Given the high-profile nature of the case, the medical examiner's office conducted an autopsy on Selena's body that very same day, just a few hours after her death. Dr. Lloyd White was the chief medical examiner, so he led the exam. Dr. White's findings were consistent with what the surgeons had already observed, and he concluded that Selena died from exsanguinating hemorrhage due to a perforating gunshot wound to the chest. Essentially, she bled to death, both internally and externally, as a result from this gunshot. Exsanguination means extreme blood loss, and the autopsy report noted massive hemorrhaging in the chest cavity and soft tissues, like we already went over. The gunshot wound was described as entering from the upper right back, so just below the shoulder blade. The entry wound was about the diameter of your fingertip, and it had an abrasion at the point of entry. There were no powder burns around it, which told the forensics team that the muzzle of the gun was not pressed against Selena's body or anywhere near her at the time of the gunshot. It was estimated to be about 18 inches to 2 feet away, and this aligns with eyewitness accounts that Selena was near the door when Yolanda fired the gun. Internally, the bullet traveled forward through Selena's body, crossing the right side of her chest. It hit the third rib, fracturing it, and that broken rib was sharp and caused additional internal damage. The bullet then went through the upper lobe of her right lung. Critically, the bullet struck and tore through the right subclavian artery, which, as we know, is a major artery, but it branches from the aorta under the collarbone. The autopsy specifically stated that the subclavian artery was lacerated or transected. This was the fatal injury that took Selena's life. After perforating the artery, the bullet continued its pathward forward, creating an exit wound on the front of Selena's chest just to the right of the midline near her clavicle. The exit wound was significantly larger and irregular, which is consistent with the hollow point bullet, causing more tissue damage on the way out. The bullet itself exited Selena's body, and investigators recovered that spent bullet from the motel room, which matched Yolanda's gun. Apart from the gunshot wound, Selena's body didn't have any other injuries. There were some minor cuts and scrapes that were consistent with her collapsing or maybe from CPR, but nothing suggested a struggle beforehand. Selena's body was otherwise in excellent health. Her organs were normal, and toxicology tests found no alcohol or any drugs in her system. This emphasized the tragedy because this was a perfectly healthy young woman who was killed solely by a single gunshot. She had so much life ahead of her. The manner of death was, of course, ruled a homicide. Dr. White also wrote in his report that the injury was rapidly fatal. He estimated that from the moment of being shot, Selena likely virtually lost all of the blood within her body within just minutes. In fact, by the time she was on the ER table, only the blood that was being transfused into her was present, and that quickly bled out too. The autopsy reinforced that even with immediate medical attention, the wound would have been difficult to survive unless it occurred on an operating table with a vascular surgeon ready, and even then, the chances were slim. One especially heartbreaking finding was that forensic experts concluded that if the bullet's trajectory had been just slightly different, by maybe a centimeter or even a few millimeters higher or lower, it might have missed the subclavian artery. In that scenario, Selena's injury, while still serious, probably wouldn't have been fatal. She might have survived with quick medical care, possibly a collapsed lung or a broken bone, but not massive internal bleeding. It was a cruel twist of fate that that bullet hit the exact spot that caused unsurvivable damage. The autopsy findings became a key part of the prosecution's case against Yolanda Saldivar. They proved that the shooting could not have been accidental in the way that Yolanda claimed it was. They also demonstrated the pain and suffering that Selena endured in those moments after being shot because she had the capacity to run and speak before collapsing, meaning she wasn't killed instantly, and she was able to specifically name both Yolanda and the room number. After the autopsy, Selena's body was released to her family. Within 2 days, a public viewing was held where tens of thousands of mourners came to pay respects, seeing Selena in her iconic purple outfit lying in her casket. But before we talk about what happened later, we need to talk about everything that was discovered at the crime scene. The main scene was in room 158 at the Days Inn, where the confrontation took place, along with the exterior walkway and motel lobby where Selena collapsed. Another scene emerged in the parking lot, where Yolanda Saldivar was in a tense standoff with the police inside of her truck, but we'll also talk about that here in a minute. Once Yolanda finally surrendered, detectives began processing the scene. Inside room 158, they found a surprisingly neat room, which contradicted Yolanda's claim that Selena had been throwing papers everywhere. Blood smears and drops were discovered near the doorway and outside of the room, and investigators followed that long trail of blood leading from the doorway to the lobby where Selena collapsed. Photos of the trail later demonstrated how far she ran before finally succumbing to her injuries. The police found Selena's black bag, which contained her personal items and 19 credit cards. Several of the cards were in Yolanda's name and others belonged to her sister. The investigators stated that this implied Selena had taken those cards to confront Yolanda or deliver them to her father as evidence of the embezzlement. The bag also had business documents, including receipts and bank records, which would later be used to support the prosecution's theory that Yolanda had been embezzling money. The murder weapon was recovered from Yolanda's truck. Ballistics found one spent shell casing and 4 live rounds, and testing confirmed that the gun was functional and hadn't misfired, shutting down Yolanda's claim that it went off accidentally. The bullet that killed Selena was recovered from the wall near the door inside room 158 and was conclusively matched to Yolanda's revolver through ballistic analysis. The motel lobby, which was considered the secondary scene, was also examined. Investigators collected blood samples, Selena's clothing, and personal items that had been removed by the paramedics. The bullet hole and residue on her jacket were consistent with a shot being fired from behind and at a distance, which also contradicted Yolanda's story that the gun discharged while she and Selena were facing each other and fighting. Witness statements from motel employees and bystanders also confirmed that Selena ran from the room shouting for help while Yolanda pursued her with a gun. Multiple witnesses saw Selena collapse in the lobby and heard her name clearly stated that Yolanda was the shooter. Family members, including Abraham, Suzette, and Chris Perez, provided background on Yolanda's financial misconduct, helping to further establish this motive that was rooted in theft and betrayal. After shooting Selena, Yolanda Saldivar locked herself inside her truck inside the Days Inn parking lot, holding herself at gunpoint. This held up the investigation inside the motel all day long. Around noon, police surrounded her and began a standoff that lasted nearly 9.5 hours. Negotiators, including Corpus Christi police and their FBI consultant, spoke to Yolanda through a phone, trying their best to keep her calm and convince her to surrender. She cried and screamed that her life was over and repeatedly said that the shooting was an accident. Isn't it interesting that in these cases, it's always the perpetrator saying that their life is over after taking someone else's? Let me know if you've noticed this pattern too down in the comments below. Throughout the afternoon, Yolanda alternated between despair and panic. She claimed that she only bought the gun to harm herself after being accused of stealing from Selena, and that it went off accidentally while she was holding it. Negotiators didn't challenge her story because they were focusing on preventing her from pulling the trigger. At one point, she agreed to come out of the truck, but panicked when she saw a police sniper and retreated back inside. As the day turned into night, police drained the truck's fuel, brought in floodlights, and tried to control the growing crowds of fans that were all gathering nearby to see what was going on. Negotiators reassured Yolanda that she would be treated fairly if she surrendered, and they avoided telling her that Selena had died at that moment. Finally, at about 9:30 p.m., exhausted and dehydrated, Yolanda placed the gun on the seat and exited the truck with her hands up. She was arrested and brought in unharmed. When told later that Selena had died, Yolanda cried and said that she didn't mean to kill her, but overall, she showed little emotion about her so-called friend. The murder of Selena by her former fan club president, Yolanda Saldivar, led to one of the most publicized trials in Texas history. The case captivated the entire nation because this was about a beloved young celebrity's murder with the shocking betrayal of a trusted friend. Because emotions ran so high and nearly everyone in Selena's hometown of Corpus Christi had very strong opinions on this, the judge ordered a change of venue, moving the trial to Houston to ensure that Yolanda would receive a fair trial. Saldivar entered a plea of not guilty, claiming that the shooting was accidental. The prosecution maintained that it was a calculated act of murder committed out of fear and anger after Selena confronted her over the financial misconduct. Selecting a jury in Houston took considerable effort since everybody knew about this case, even in Houston. Ultimately, 12 jurors, most of them being women, were chosen, and in October of 1995, the trial began. To prevent the spectacle that surrounded the recent O.J. Simpson trial, the judge barred cameras and imposed a gag order, but reporters inside that courtroom relayed daily updates to Selena's millions of fans. During opening statements, the prosecution described Saldivar as a trusted employee who turned thief and murderer as soon as she was caught. The state's evidence included her purchase of the gun, the confrontation at the motel, and Selena's own identification of her killer. Witnesses from the motel testified that Selena named Yolanda as the shooter and even specified room 158 as she was bleeding to death. Police and forensic experts talked about the crime scene. Investigator Carlos Cardona showed photos of the blood trail and described finding a bag containing Yolanda's and her sister's credit cards, linking the crime to the embezzlement motive. Ballistics and firearms specialists confirmed that the bullet matched Saldivar's revolver and that the trigger required deliberate pressure, ruling out any accidental misfiring. Paramedics and emergency room staff talked about the intense attempts that were made to revive Selena. Dr. Louise Elkins testified that she had already suffered irreversible brain damage from massive blood loss and explained that doctors had administered 6 units of blood despite the family's Jehovah's Witness faith, confirming that even transfusions couldn't have saved her life. Medical examiner Dr. Lloyd White provided autopsy results showing that Selena died from a gunshot wound that caused catastrophic bleeding. He shared that he found no stippling, proving that the weapon had been fired from more than a foot away, and the back-to-front trajectory indicating that Selena was running while shot. Abraham Quintanilla Jr. testified that he had fired Saldivar weeks earlier for theft and that Selena went to the motel to retrieve those missing documents. The prosecution shared evidence of Yolanda's gun purchases, including buying, returning, and then repurchasing the same revolver just days before the killing as proof of premeditation, and her own written statement admitting that she pulled the gun. This was read to the jurors. Together, these details formed a crystal clear picture of exactly what happened. Facing overwhelming evidence, the defense agreed that Yolanda did fire the gun but insisted it was an accident. Her team argued that she bought the weapon only to end her own life after losing Selena's friendship. He emphasized that she never had previously threatened Selena and portrayed her as this distraught admirer rather than a cold-blooded killer. Character witnesses described her as gentle but depressed. The defense speculated that the gun discharged during a struggle or emotional breakdown, and they pointed to her frantic statements during the police standoff to support this when she said, "I didn't mean to do it," as evidence of remorse rather than a calculated murder. Saldivar didn't testify, and in closing, the state reminded the jury that Selena's final words, Yolanda 158, left no doubt about her killer's identity. He argued that bringing a gun, firing it into Selena's back, and then chasing her proved deliberate intent. The defense countered that the act was reckless and emotional, but not premeditated, urging jurors to consider a lesser charge like manslaughter. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours on October 23, 1995, before returning a verdict of guilty of first-degree murder. Cheers erupted outside the courthouse as the news spread. 35-year-old Yolanda Saldivar remained expressionless as the family wept in relief. At sentencing, prosecutors sought the maximum penalty, while the defense asked for mercy based on her clean record. The court imposed a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 30 years, and that is the harshest non-capital sentence that you can get in Texas. She also got a $10,000 fine. Saldivar was eligible for parole this year in 2025. After multiple unsuccessful attempts, she remained in protective custody for her safety because many inmates are still devoted Selena fans. And let me tell you, from what I see online, there are many people out in the world that are anticipating her release. Yolanda Saldivar has to be one of the most villainous people for taking the life of someone that was and is still adored by millions of people, so I almost feel like she's safer in prison. When her parole review arrived for this year, 2025, the Texas Board of Pardons and Parolees denied release, citing the brutality of the crime and ongoing security concerns for both Saldivar and the public. Her next review is scheduled for 2030, and she's expected to remain incarcerated for the foreseeable future. Selena Quintanilla Perez's death has left a lasting and immeasurable impact on her fans, her community, and the music industry as a whole. Nobody was impacted more than her husband Chris and her family, though. In the days following her murder, an outpouring of grief spread all across Texas, Mexico, and beyond. Vigils were held everywhere, and more than 60,000 people attended her public viewing in Corpus Christi, with mourners lining up overnight to say their final goodbyes. On April 12, 1995, which would have been her 24th birthday, Texas Governor and future President George W. Bush declared Selena Day to honor her contributions to her music and culture. Just a few months later, in July of 1995, Selena's highly anticipated English crossover album Dreaming of You was released. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 chart, making history as the first album by a predominantly Spanish-speaking artist to do so. The record sold millions of copies, confirming that Selena had just been on the verge of international superstardom right before her life was cut short. I watched an interview of her husband, and he said that for many, many years, he wasn't able to listen to the song Dreaming of You because of the timing and context of the song. I want you to put yourself in his shoes as her spouse and listen to that song now. It is so heartbreaking, and I hear the song so differently now that I know that context and knowing that it was one of the last songs that she recorded before she was killed. Despite the decades that have passed, public fascination with this case hasn't gone anywhere. Any new developments related to Yolanda Saldivar, like her parole eligibility or occasional prison interviews, still capture media attention, even though she continues to claim that the shooting was an accident. I found out as I was finishing my research for this case that Netflix will be releasing a documentary on Selena, I believe, in a week or so I look forward to watching it. Selena's trusting and compassionate nature was both her gift and her biggest downfall. Friends and family members have said that there were warning signs about Yolanda's controlling behavior, but no one could have predicted the violence that was to come. Her murder was a devastating loss that left a wound that is still felt decades later. Selena's last act of naming her killer while clinging to life stood as a final display of strength. And even though the doctors and law enforcement couldn't save her life, their quick response ensured that justice was served. Selena remains forever 23, frozen in time as a vibrant, rising star whose dreams and impact have outlived her. Her legacy transcends tragedy because she opened doors for countless artists, helped reshape mainstream pop culture, and became a symbol of cultural pride and empowerment. While Yolanda rots behind prison walls and is probably in fear of getting out, Selena's music and memory continue to shine untouched by time, tragedy, or even betrayal. So, now that you know that Selena did not pass away because of refusing blood due to her faith, she fought hard for her life and would have done anything to keep it. I wanted to cover today's case because I've only ever heard of that rumor that Selena died from the transfusion refusal, and I wanted to look into this myself. I was so surprised to find that that was not the case, and I immediately started researching for today's video. Thank you all so much for spending time with me today. Let me know if you guys liked today's video. I know it was really heavy on the medical parts, but you also know I love your feedback. Please be kind to yourselves and do all the self-care that you need this week. Nurse's orders. I'll see you next weekend. Bye.